April is officially over, and with the weather getting nicer, you probably don't want to sit inside staring at a screen poring over every single IGN video game review trying to figure out which video games are or aren't worth your time. And that's why I've prepared this video in which we will speedrun every single IGN video game review that came out in April of 2021. Let's go! Here are April 2021's game reviews from worst to best. Jarrett Green checked out Arkham Horror, Mother's Embrace, and only thought it was mediocre, scoring it a 5 out of 10. Between a rote story, repetitive pushover combat, and softball detective work, Jarrett found its take on Lovecraftian horror/mystery doesn't really do anything too inspired or out of the ordinary, nor is it particularly mysterious or scary. But he did praise its character design and use of color, which at the very least helped set the otherworldly mood and made it nice to look at. In his farewell review for IGN, David Jagnew put the Magic Legends open beta through its paces and came away equally underwhelmed. He thought this Diablo-style action RPG has potential thanks to the variety its deck-building systems adds, but was not wild about the amount of grinding involved or the somewhat stingy cash shop. He also noted significant frame rate drops even when playing on a powerful gaming rig. He's optimistic that Cryptic Studios can eventually whip it into shape if it sticks with it though. Gabriel Moss took Doom 3 VR Edition for a spin, and it gave him the spins in return. While he raved about how well some of the 2004 shooter's scares and combat come across in VR, not enough is done to update much of the movement and controls for a screen strapped to your face. He notes that strafing is specifically vomit-inducing, even for someone like him who spends half their life in virtual reality. That said, he had some fun shooting demons and chainsawing zombies with the PSVR's aim controller, but it still ended up with a 5 out of 10. Travis Northup took a weird trip down memory lane with Oddworld Soulstorm, the modern remake of the classic PS1 game Abe's Exodus. Travis scored it a 7 out of 10, praising its modernized look and its phenomenal story, as well as quality of life tweaks like overhauled controls and checkpointing that meet the 2021 standards. Unfortunately, his playthrough was plagued by bugs that made Oddworld's already challenging difficulty flat out frustrating, frequently forcing him to reboot entirely to proceed, as well as some ear-shatteringly inconsistent sound design. Seth Macy reviewed Pac Man 99, scoring it a 7 out of 10. It is yet another classic game reinvented as a multiplayer battle royale on the Switch, and Seth felt it was fun enough thanks to the way it shakes up the classic formula with a layer of competitive strategy. On the other hand, it only has a single maze, so once you zero in on a winning playstyle, that accounts for all of its weird twists on the original Pac Man's rules, and there's not really much else to see. Thankfully, it's free to play, and its paywalled content and microtransactions seem pretty harmless. John Ryan reviewed Outriders, and it also received a 7 out of 10. JR praised the creature and world design, cackled out loud at some of the power combos you and your friends can use to mulch enemies in co-op, and said the RPG loot system was generally satisfying enough to justify some drawbacks like a lackluster story, clunky interface, and technical issues. Anecdotally, the buzz I've heard for Outriders is that it's one of those games that's totally fine on its own, but if you play it co-op with friends, it's way better. Luke Riley is IGN's guy who reviews games about racing motor vehicles, and since that's what MotoGP 21 is, Luke reviewed it, and he scored it a 7 out of 10. He felt the additions made since last year's MotoGP were minimal enough that longtime players might be disappointed, but that minor tweaks to bike handling made for the best feeling MotoGP game to date. And for newcomers, an improved tutorial mode makes its complex bikes more accessible than ever, and while he was amused by the new feature of having to manually run over and retrieve your bike after falling off of it, there's a big catch. Your AI competition just instantly respawns on their bikes and leaves you in their dust. That seems like a feature that would be right at home in a Tron game, but a pretty cheap trick in a realistic motorcycle racer. This month's last 7 out of 10 was given to Total War Rome Remastered by reviewer Leanna Hafer. She was pleased with the updated visuals and tweaks to the UI, as well as some new features like the ability to experiment with the size of armies to create some massive battles, and not having to unlock factions at the beginning of the game. But, as is often the case with remasters, staying faithful means some things will feel outdated. Strategy game AI has come so far in the last 18 years that Leanna likens some of her time with Total War Rome now to going back in time and fighting her middle school bully. But otherwise, it sounds like it hit some of the right nostalgic notes. Gabriel Moss reviewed MLB The Show 2021, which brings the formerly PlayStation exclusive baseball game to Xbox for the first time and even allows cross-platform play. Gabriel scored it an 8, pointing out that it's largely the same as last year's iteration of the show, with minor tweaks to menu organization and a new stadium creator mode. He praised the PS5 version's use of 3D audio and the DualSense controller's haptics, but was disappointed that save transfers can't be imported from earlier versions of the show, as is the tradition of his people. Overall, it's good news for Xbox-owning baseball fans, and even people who don't own Xboxes but subscribe to Game Pass, cause it's on there too and you can just stream it to your phone now. Plus, there are also some rumors that the show might show up on Nintendo Switch at some point, which would be cool for people who enjoy baseball so much they'd like to play a video game about it. Human review machine Mitchell Saltzman reviewed Returnal, the PS5 exclusive roguelike shoot 'em up from Housemarque, and that also scored an 8. He thought the moment-to-moment gameplay was sublime thanks to its wide arsenal of weapons, as well as the clever ways it uses the DualSense controller's haptic feedback, like vibrating a certain way to let you know if an attack cooldown is over. He was also impressed with Returnal's story, which unfolds partially in first-person exploration segments that help break up the fast-paced shooting. Returnal developer Housemarque has a reputation for bullet hell shmups, which is upheld here, but as a roguelike, Mitchell had some gripes. Specifically, that the extended length of each run, coupled with the fact that you can't save in the middle of one, means you have to clear your schedule before you get started. Plus, he found it hard to get excited about jumping in for just one more run because the progression is so slow. Even so, he heartily recommends it as one of Housemarque's best. Mitchell also reviewed Nier Replicant, version 1.22474487139, scoring it at 8.0415221, which got rounded down to a solid 8 because nobody has time for that many decimal places, Square Enix. This is, of course, a remake of the beloved 2010 action RPG that laid the groundwork for Nier Automata. Mitchell thought the overhauled graphics, animations, environments, and combat go a long way to modernize the gameplay, and all new voice acting for just about every character boosts the amazing story to new heights. At the same time, he found the combat became a breeze before too long, and turning up the difficulty just made the enemies more annoyingly spongy. And outside of the main quest, Replicant suffers from some structural issues you might expect in a decade-old game, like painfully mundane side quests that have you fetching 10 of this and 50 of that. However, it's well worth powering through for the sake of the characters and story, which is what made people fall in love with Nier in the first place. Last but not least, Rebecca Valentine reviewed new Pokémon Snap, and that also got an 8 out of 10. She felt that it succeeds as a reinvention of the beloved 22-year-old N64 wildlife photography game, taking what made the original work and modernizing it to 2021 standards, since, after all, real-life photography has undergone a few changes since those days of Kodak Advantix and Polaroid iZones and Sony Mavicas, and Rebecca felt it had some of the best graphics in a Pokémon game to date. Her biggest complaints are that it's inconsistent in recognizing your photography skills and sometimes dismisses what looks like a fantastic moment as more of the same, and that the Switch also had some trouble keeping up with the frame rate when some of the more elaborate critters were on the screen. So there you have it, that is a roundup of all the reviews that IGN put up in April of 2021, and guess what? More video games are coming out next month, and we're gonna put up lots more reviews, and I'll make another one of these videos at the end of next month, which is probably a terrible idea right before E3, but I'm still gonna do it. And if you wanna look ahead at what's coming out in June, I made a whole video rounding up June's biggest games. And guess what? I forgot that Shin Megami Tensei remaster, and the people in the comments are steamed. So go check that out. I'll see you next month.